हर सवाल के हम ही जवाब हैं।
Good evening, friends and comrades. Welcome to the second day session on Loksabha elections 2024. I am Dr. Suresh. I work as an assistant professor in public health dentistry. I am moderating today's session on behalf of Vedika moderators team. We have just listened to one more number from Anushtup, the revolutionary rock band. Duniya ke har sawal ke hum hi jawab hai. We are the answer for all the problems of the world, for all the questions of the world. Who else have the conviction, courage, and capacity to say this other than the working class? So today, while we are talking about the present tasks of working class, Comrade Abhinav wanted us to play this energetic song. Then few instructions before we go into the session. This is an audio meeting. We cannot see any video. This program is being live streamed on Vedika Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can see the links for the concerned pages and channel in the text channel here. So if you have any friends who wants to join the discussion but not able to join Discord, please share these links to them. You can see the links in this text channel titled Questions and Information. In order to be able to hear this discussion clearly, please connect to your device with earphones and connect to a good broadband internet. The moderator's team has been monitoring this talk. If there are any problems, we rectify it immediately. If there is any issue, if there is any problem for you to hear, if there is any disturbance in the voice, please check your internet connection, your earphones, and disconnect and reconnect. If still the problem persists, please bring it to our notice by messaging in the text channel here. Comrade Abhinav will answer the questions asked by the members at the end of his talk. But please note down your questions and post them here in this questions and information text channel when we invite you to post the questions. Those friends who are following the discussion on YouTube and Facebook can also ask questions by posting your questions in the relevant comment box. Our moderators will present those questions to Comrade Abhinav. However, the questions posted in Discord will be given priority. As I said, today we are on the second session. Yesterday, Comrade Abhinav, in the first session, spoke on the possible trajectories of fascist rule in the coming 5 years. He elaborated the general characteristic features of fascism, 5 general characteristic features, the fundamental contradiction being the capitalist crisis. So there is no fascism ever in the world without an underlying capitalist crisis. Then he spoke on the specific characteristic features of fascism. Since 1970s, capitalism has never recovered from a crisis. The crisis, instead of being cataclysmic, it has become a permanent feature with bouts of depression in the capitalist production system. Henceforth, fascism too, instead of being cataclysmic, as we had seen in Germany and Italy, since 1970s, fascism has become a more or less permanent feature in society. And he spoke on the other specific features, having the petty bourgeois mass base, etc. And while answering to the questions asked by members, Abhinav added some more valuable points to his discussion. Especially the approach of Indian fascism to the question of caste. While talking on various issues, Abhinav suggested Vedika to host discussions on the history of Communist International and on caste question. So, Comrade Abhinav, yesterday I wanted to respond to that. Vedika earlier hosted a 3-part discussion on the history of Communist International. And as you advised, soon we will take up discussion on the caste question in India. Thank you for those advice. And friends, so today in the second part of the discussion, Comrade Abhinav will speak on the present tasks before the working class in the fight against fascism. Comrade Abhinav is a Marxist theorist. He is the editor of Mazdoor Bigul, a working class newspaper. He is also a blogger. He runs Red Polemic blog. He authored many books and essays on issues related to Marxist theory and practice. He actively participated in organizing the workers in trade union struggles. Comrade Abhinav, welcome again. Good evening, and I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Comrade Suresh. I would just build upon the discussion, taking cue from where we left the discussion yesterday. The first part was understanding fascism in its historicity and contemporaneity. That is, understanding the universal characteristic features of fascism as it actually materialized in the history of the 20th century, and then also understanding the changes and the profound metamorphosis that the modus vivendi and modus operandi of fascism underwent, especially since the last quarter of the 20th century. Uh, on the basis of precisely these changes and also the universal characteristics of fascism, now we can embark upon a discussion regarding the possible effective proletarian strategy and general tactics against fascism in present times. Yesterday, a couple of comrades told me that I had been speaking at a very fast pace yesterday, and it was a little bit difficult for certain comrades to follow the discussion due to the speed at which I was speaking. It's a very bad habit. I have been criticized by many comrades so many times for this. I will try to rectify that mistake today, and I'll speak as slowly as possible. But when there is a stream of thoughts coming into your mind and you are a communist militant, then some things cannot be controlled and regulated. But still, I will try. So, I'll directly come to the main point instead of building a big backgrounder. As far as the proletarian strategy and general tactics against fascism is concerned, I would like to draw attention of all the comrades to two things. One is the general political tasks, some of the general political tasks that revolutionary communists, not as members of any particular organization, but generally speaking, all revolutionary communists are faced with. There are three general political tasks that we are faced with. And then when we are talking about the tasks of a revolutionary communist organization in particular, where I will be presenting my organization's view of the pertinent tasks that face us vis-a-vis an anti-fascist proletarian strategy. So there are two parts of discussion today. One is general political tasks before revolutionary communism in general, and second, the particular task that a communist, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist organization faces today, as far as we are talking about anti-fascism. So the very first general political task today in our country, and I guess in most of the country where the threat of fascism and different forms of far-right reaction loom large, the first general political task in that regard is building a new revolutionary communist party. That is the most important task, general political task that we are faced with. Now, there are many organizations which claim that they are party or which claim that they are the uh, All India Communist Party of this country. But we know that entire revolutionary communist movement is facing unprecedented disintegration and dispersal right now. And the past more than 5 decades after the Naxalbari revolt, the story has been of endless splits, endless dispersal, endless disintegration. And the principal reason behind that is that the Indian communist had been historically speaking intellectually very weak. Before independence, it was dependent. Instead of taking up the task of creatively applying the science of Marxism on the particular Indian situation, even when the CPI was revolutionary, it relied heavily on the resolutions of Comintern and advices and suggestions given by various major international parties. At one time, it was CPGB, the Communist Party of Great Britain. At another point, it was the Bolshevik Party of the Soviet Union. At another point, it was the Chinese Party. And due to this intellectual dependence or lack of the courage to implement Marxist science, courage as well as ability to implement Marxist science on the particular conditions of Indian social formation, the communist movement was unable to devise the correct ideological and political line as well as a correct program of revolution in the Indian situation. And due to that, this endless story of endless fragmentation and dispersal has continued and still continuing. So, faced with this situation, one of the principal tasks is building a new revolutionary communist party in India. Why I'm saying this is that to understand that, we have to understand what a communist party is. We know that it is the vanguard of the proletariat, which is the most revolutionary class. But moving beyond that, Communist Party as a vanguard is basically the headquarter or center of proletarian class struggle and war. It is the center where the proletariat devises its strategy and general tactics to be implemented in its class struggle. Without the ideological and political leadership of a vanguard communist party, the proletariat cannot constitute itself and organize itself as a political class. A political class is a class which carries a political project, a state project, the project to establish its own rule. Without the leadership of a communist party, the working class cannot constitute itself as a political class, as the proletariat, in its struggle against the bourgeoisie. In other words, in the lack of the ideological and political leadership of a vanguard proletarian organization, the working class is bound to be limited within the ambit of its immediate particular economic interests. It can only think about its immediate particular economic interests without the ideological and political leadership of the party. In other words, even simpler words, the working class struggles cannot go beyond the limits posed by economistic and trade unionist struggles. Lenin, in fact, raised this very particular point in his epochal work, What is to be Done. And this point was raised for the first time by Lenin in one of his articles written before What is to be Done. It is called Where to Begin. In that article, and then in a more detailed fashion in What is to be Done, Lenin precisely said that without the ideological and political leadership of the party, without the role of socialist ideology, the economistic and trade unionist struggle cannot spontaneously develop the socialist consciousness, cannot spontaneously enable the working class to develop a political project and therefore transform itself from merely being a social class into a political class which has a political project, a state project. In that situation, the working class limits its struggles to the struggles for higher wages, for various economic benefits, etc., etc. And another tendency, which is an expression of economism, is anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism. Precisely due to this tendency, the working class also fails to understand the need for a vanguard organization. Different tendencies of workerism, operaismo, non-party revolutionism, and liquidationism, they raise their head in the working class politics. So it is that need for a party is essential here. So first we need to understand the party class dialectic. The party class dialectic, what does it say? The party class dialectic says that proletariat is the most revolutionary class, but proletariat alone does not make history. It makes history only when it is capable of giving political leadership to the masses in general. Masses and people, these are dynamic concepts. The masses constitute of different classes at different junctures of history. For example, if we are talking about anti-feudal, anti-imperialist struggle, then the people also, one of the constituent elements of people is also national bourgeoisie, which is fighting against feudalism and imperialism. But as soon as the democratic stage is over, as soon as the anti-feudal and anti-imperialist democratic tasks have been fulfilled, the democratic revolution has been consummated either in a revolutionary process or in a non-revolutionary gradual process. Once that stage is over, then the very definition of people and masses changes. Now, bourgeoisie, which has, in the stage of socialist revolution, which has gained share or gained hegemony in the state, it is no longer part of the masses or the people. So I'm using this term in the Maoist vein as a dynamic concept. So the people uh, and the enemy, these two categories Mao uses repeatedly, both of these are dynamic concepts. It depends on the level of development of society, how we define the category of people and how we define the category of the enemies. Anyway, without the leadership of the party, ideological and political leadership of the party, the proletariat, which is the most revolutionary class, fails to constitute itself as a political class and fails to constitute itself as the political leader of the masses. And it is masses that make history. Proletariat alone doesn't make history. Those who claim that basically belong to the Lassallean, neo-Lassallean Trotskyite trends like, Alexander Parvus and Trotsky and Lassalle. Lassalle was the one who said that proletariat is the only revolutionary class. Marx said no, proletariat is the most revolutionary class, not the only revolutionary class, and it is the people that make history, not proletariat alone. Now, the other side of the coin is that the people can make history only under the leadership of the proletariat. That is the mass class dialectic. So the party class dialectic is that without the ideological and political leadership of a vanguard proletarian organization, the proletariat fails to constitute itself as a political class and as the political leader of the masses. Second thing is that the mass class dialectic. The mass class dialectic is resolved only if the party class dialectic is resolved. The proletariat cannot consummate revolution on its own. It cannot achieve the revolutionary consummation on its own. It is only the masses which make history, but the masses can make history only under the leadership of the proletariat. So that is the mass class dialectic. Proletariat does not make history alone. Masses make history, but masses make history only under the leadership of the proletariat. And when the proletariat, under the ideological and political leadership of a vanguard proletarian party, is able or succeeds to constitute itself as a political class and the political leadership of the masses, only then the mass capitalist state dialectic is resolved. Only then the masses are rendered with the potential and force to subvert the state, to smash the bourgeois state and establish a socialist system. So these three things are very important. One is party class dialectic. Without resolving that dialectic, the proletariat cannot become a political class and the political leadership of the masses. Without proletariat become establishing its political and ideological hegemony among the masses, the variety of bourgeois ideologies and bourgeois politics prevails among the masses, and the masses, instead of taking a revolutionary path, they tail end the ruling classes. In the absence of proletarian politics and ideology, the masses are bound, they are obliged, historically speaking, to tail end the ruling classes. So this mass class dialectic must be resolved in order to render the masses with the political force and political potency to subvert the capitalist system. So this is a very important point that we need to understand, that the proletariat must rid itself of non-proletarian bourgeois ideologies like economism, trade unionism, anarchism, and anarcho-syndicalism in order to constitute itself as a political class, in order to establish the hegemony of proletarian politics and ideology among the masses. Masses are the site, in other words, where the struggle between the proletariat and bourgeoisie rages on. The bourgeoisie tries to establish the hegemony of its own ideology and politics among the masses, and the proletariat struggle against the bourgeoisie to establish the hegemony of its own ideology and politics among the masses. Whether the proletariat is victorious depends precisely on the fact whether it is able to establish the hegemony of its ideology and politics among the masses. In order to do so, it must get rid of economism, these tendencies of economism, anarchism, anarcho-syndicalism. Without that, it cannot do so. And once it can do so and it is able to establish its ideological and political hegemony, then the masses are rendered with the potency and force to subvert the capitalist system. Now, one can say, how does it particularly relate to fascism? Because fascism itself is a reactionary, one of the most reactionary bourgeois, maybe the most reactionary bourgeois ideology and politics. And fascism too strives to maintain the hegemony of its ideology and politics among the masses. Without the existence of a revolutionary communist party at the level of the country, uh, the, it is impossible to resist the fascist ideology and politics among the masses. In order to organize the ideological and political struggle against fascism in a consistent fashion, you need a revolutionary communist party at the level of the country. And without this, this struggle against fascism will always be dispersed, fragmented, unplanned, and dispersed. So, in order to systematize, in order to give it a planned form, in order to give it an organized form, this struggle against fascist ideology and politics, we essentially need a revolutionary communist party, and the lack of the same is one of the major general problems which we face in our anti-fascist struggle. This is a structural long-term task to build a revolutionary communist party. It is in general also important. I mean, even if there is no fascist regime, even if there is some non-fascist bourgeois party in power in the country, and even if fascists are not in power, this task is relevant even then. But especially in times of fascism, in the period of fascism, this task becomes even more important. Now, this task, a long-term task, must not be interpreted in a temporal fashion. It doesn't mean that we don't need to work on this task immediately. In terms of temporality, even though it is a structural long-term task, we need to start immediate work to fulfill this task. And to fulfill this task, there are many different things or functions that we need to do or we need to fulfill. What are these particular functions or tasks that I'm talking about? The first task is a relentless ideological and political revolutionary communist propaganda among different classes of the people. Again, here I'm talking about the people as a dynamic concept. People, in this sense, is the broad camp of all the classes which are exploited and oppressed in capitalist system in any way. The classes which do not have a future in the capitalist system. So, a consistent and relentless revolutionary communist ideological and political propaganda among the masses is the first task. The second task is to establish the correct ideological and political line and the understanding of a correct program among the progressive circles of the country. Progressive circles include everyone. I mean, the communist cadre, which is member of different revolutionary communist organizations, and even some of the social democratic organizations, because as Stalin and Mao emphasized time and again, the cadre is the last to be corrupted. So we cannot deny the fact that there are a lot of revolutionary communist elements even in the ranks of various social democratic parties. So here I'm talking about the progressive camp or the progressive circle in the broadest possible sense. To carry out political discussions, debates, and two-line struggle within this broad progressive camp to establish the correct ideological and political line and to develop a correct understanding of the stage of revolution. That is the question of program of Indian socialist revolution. That is the second most important task. The third task is the more particular task of carrying out the two-line struggle within the communist circles, not simply the broad progressive camp, but the communist circle. The fourth task is to, perform the task of recruitment, new, fresh recruitment. One, till now, I talked about winning over the progressive and communist elements within the broad progressive camp as well as the cadre of different communist organizations and groups. Now I'm talking about the elements who are not converted as yet, who are politically uninitiated as yet, to bring new fresh blood and new fresh recruitments from among the working class as well as the student youth and petty bourgeois intelligentsia within the communist movement, recruiting them to the communist organization, educating and training them on the question of correct ideological and political line and a correct program, educating and training them to do revolutionary political work among the masses, educating and training them to awaken and mobilize and organize the masses and organizing the militant mass movements of the masses. This is the fourth most important task. So only on the basis of performing these particular tasks, we can fulfill the task of building a new revolutionary communist center, which can eventually evolve into the new revolutionary communist party. The point I'm trying to make here is that now the element of party formation is secondary and the element of party building is primary. You cannot hope to build a new revolutionary communist party just by bipartites and unities and dialogue between existing communist groups and existing communist organizations. That is the secondary aspect now. The primary aspect is the element of new, the element of novelty, the element of building a new revolutionary communist party based on three pillars. One is new experiments, two, a new center of ideas, and three, a new center of recruitment. On these three pillars, building a new revolutionary communist center is essential. Why I'm saying this is simply because of the fact that we need to understand why in the past 5.5 decades after the beginning of the Naxalbari revolt and radical rupture from the revisionism of CPI and CPM, why the revolutionary communist movement failed to build an all India revolutionary communist party, a new revolutionary communist party. The reason for that failure is that the inability to develop and devise a correct political and ideological line and a correct program, and most importantly, a correct program to still identify the Indian society as a semi-feudal, semi-colonial formation and to still characterize the Indian bourgeoisie as a comprador bourgeoisie. It's like being imprisoned in a time capsule or a space capsule. They don't understand it is outdated, outmoded light. They don't understand the changes in the Indian social formation, the changes in the Indian state structure, the changes in the entire mode of production in India. And that is why, due to the inability to understand the correct program, due to the inability to analyze the Indian society and Indian class structure from a creative application of Marxist science, they failed to reach a correct program. And due to the two things, incorrect program and implementation of two extremes of mistakes, either parliamentary cretinism, to the words of Lenin, to use the words of Lenin, I mean revisionism, the extreme of right opportunism, and the other extreme of left adventurism as implemented by CPI Maoist and various left adventurist so-called Maoist organizations. So in the absence of a revolutionary mass line, in the absence of a Leninist Bolshevik party, in the absence of a correct understanding of program of Indian revolution, this disintegration, dispersal, and endless fragmentation is continuing. Most of these communist organizations and groups are dogmatically sticking to the same old, programmatic dogmas, and due to that, this process of fragmentation is not going to be over anytime in the near future. So dead organisms don't interact. These are like dead organisms because the three lifelines of these ML organizations is dead. One is the composition of policies and program. The second is the composition of leadership. And the third is the composition of cadre. The composition of leadership is either left opportunist, left adventurist, or right opportunist. The composition of the policies and programs is outdated and outmoded, copied from either the program of Chinese Revolution and in some exceptional cases from the Russian case. And the third is the composition of cadre, which is predominantly honest and genuine, but it has been trained in a non-Bolshevik organizational culture. And due to these three lifelines being dead of most of the communist organizations and groups, the element of party formation has now become the secondary element, and the need of the hour is to develop a new revolutionary center, the element of party building because the content itself has disintegrated. It's no more simply a question of form, different formations coming together. The element, the question or the contradiction of form has become secondary here. The primary and principal contradiction is that of building the new content, which has disintegrated due to an incorrect understanding of the ideological political line as well as the program. And that is why this task is one of the most challenging general tasks that we are faced with today. So this is the first general political task. Now, let me come to the second general political task. The second general political task is to build militant mass movements on concrete issues of the masses based on concrete program and concrete slogan. Why I'm iterating and reiterating this term concrete again and again? This is simply because of this. When we talk about, for example, inflation or unemployment or homelessness or malnutrition or social and economic insecurity and uncertainty that the broad cross-section of masses face, we are talking about them in general terms. Mehengai dur karo. But how to get rid of inflation? Do we have a concrete immediate program for that? Do we have a concrete immediate action slogan for that? We have a concrete program and a concrete slogan on the question of the problem of unemployment. Vaguely and generally talking about inflation or unemployment is not going to work. That would be a kind of a radical demagoguery which doesn't reach any operative part. The operative part is one of the most important elements of real revolutionary politics. So to build militant mass movements on all these concrete issues, we must have a very concrete understanding of the problem, the concrete ways in which we are able to establish the link between these problems and the general motion of capitalist system, and on the basis of that understanding, devising a concrete program and devising a concrete slogan. That is the most important thing. For example, if we are talking about inflation, for example, we must have a general as well as a particular understanding. In general, we know that capitalist system by its inherent motion produces the problem of inflation and price rise periodically, depending upon the cycle of boom and bust. I cannot go into the detail of Marxist political economic understanding of inflation and how we understand it, but immediately also it does not suffice to simply say that पूंजीवादी व्यवस्था में तो ये होगा ही. It is bound to happen in the capitalist system. What can you do? So directly fight for socialist revolution. Yes, the long-term aim is socialist revolution and the long-term program is socialist program. But among the masses, especially among the intermediate and backward section of masses, we also must be able to expose the immediate particular reasons for every episode of inflationary pressures. So, for example, present inflationary pressure in India is created due to two things: increasing the burden of indirect taxes among the masses, and two, decreasing the progressive taxation system. Decreasing the, obliterating the progressive taxation system. So on the one hand, giving relief to the rich classes, to the property owning classes, to the profiteering classes, giving them relief from the burden of it. I'm using this burden in double quotes, relieving them from the burden of direct taxes across slabs. Direct taxes include the progressive, the corporate tax as well as the other forms of direct tax like income tax and all. And the indirect taxes, on the other hand, are increased continuously by increasing the pressure of these indirect tax through taxation, GST, and taxes on petro products, the taxes on LPG, etc., etc. So, to reveal these particular immediate factors which are responsible for the present episode of inflationary pressures in the Indian scenario, we must be able to concretely talk about it, and only on the basis of concrete understanding of these immediate factors you can give a concrete program and a concrete slogan. For example, we give the slogan of increasing the taxes on the rich classes, the property owning classes, re-establishing the system of progressive taxation and wealth tax system of wealth taxes, and at the same time the long-term slogan within this context is completely doing away with the indirect tax. This is one of the slogans, those of you who have read the programs of communist organizations from the times of Marx and Engels. This is one of the old socialist demands, that the working classes have already contributed to the society through their productive labor. Now putting the burden of indirect taxes on the entire population especially hits the working masses who have already contributed for the social development in the social fund through their productive labor. So there is no rationale for indirect taxes. An immediate demand in this particular context is decreasing the indirect taxes on various petrol products, GST, etc., etc. Decreasing these indirect taxes and increasing the direct taxes, including the corporate tax as well as the income taxes imposed on different classes of upper middle class and upper classes. So this is an example of devising a concrete slogan and a concrete program on a concrete issue. Simply, in the same vein, you can talk about the problem of unemployment. So we come with a concrete, set of logics why we are entitled as our one of the fundamental democratic rights to an employment guarantee scheme, not only for the rural poor but for the entire citizenry of India. A general unemployment employment guarantee act, which we call Bhagat Singh National Employment Guarantee Act, BASNEGA, and we demand it and we fight for it with a concrete slogan that if the state has accepted its responsibility vis-a-vis the rural poor, that it is indeed the responsibility of the state to provide employment to the rural poor, even though the scheme which is doing this is laughable and ridiculous, because रोजगार शब्द जो होता है, it has a rose in it every day. You cannot give 100 days employment and say that it's an employment guarantee scheme. It is a poor house scheme. You must have heard about the poor house laws of England of the 19th century, where you keep the rural poor at the level of starvation by providing them this piecemeal 100-day employment scheme. So we demand, one of the immediate demand, that you give year-long employment under the Manrega and replace Manrega with a general employment guarantee scheme where a pakka rozgar, a pakka employment will be provided to all who are looking for employment, who are demanding employment, who are searching for jobs. And if the state fails to provide these jobs, it must provide a unemployment allowance which is sufficient for the expenditure of a family. There are different ways to calculate that. I'm not going into the detail of that. So the second task is one of the most important immediate tasks, is building militant mass movements on the concrete issues of the masses with concrete program and concrete slogan. Now we know that in the absence of the revolutionary parties, these different separated mass movement themselves can only pose an immediate challenge to fascism, not a long-term general challenge to fascism. Fascism can come up with ways of dealing with scattered and multiple scattered mass movements. Only a revolutionary party can give a unitary political program, a unitary political aim to different militant mass movements. But these two tasks, the first task, building a revolutionary communist party, and building militant mass movement of different classes and sections of the masses, are not two tasks which are completely different. In fact, the party itself can be built by building militant mass movement, and on the other hand, militant mass movements can come under a unitary political program only through a revolutionary party. Again, here we are talking about mass class dialectic. So the second task is building militant mass movements and coalescing them under one unitary radical socialist political program. That is the second most important strategy against fascism. Why? Because militant mass movement, by articulating the class contradictions in the correct fashion and giving a correct program to deal with different problems of masses, they struggle against the obfuscation of class consciousness among the masses. Yesterday we talked that fascist politics is based on the misarticulation of real class contradictions and couching them in one of the chauvinist ideologies like communalism or racism or xenophobia, etc. When you build mass movement based on real class contradictions with concrete program and concrete slogans, then you are attacking at the core of fascist politics, which is based on the misarticulation of real class contradiction and muddling and obfuscating the question of the real enemy. Who is the real enemy? The militant mass movement systematically put the entire communist system and the capitalist system and the capitalist class in the dock. And by this, they attack at the core of the fascist politics, the functioning of the fascist politics. And in this way, it poses a big challenge. If scattered only in the immediate sense, if organized by a communist party into a single general revolutionary political movement, then a long-term challenge to the fascist offensive. So this is the second most important task, building militant students movement for equal and free education for all and employment for all, building a workers movement for all the democratic workers' rights that they have won through decades or even many centuries of struggle, from the question of length of the working day, from the question of a decent minimum wage, from the question of the right to form unions, from the question, all these things. Building militant mass movements for all these sections and classes of the masses that poses a big threat, a big challenge to the fascist offensive. The third general political task is the question of anti-fascist united front. Now, this question is a very, very debatable question because there are two different models of anti-fascist united front. One is the model of united front of the working class, to which the Comintern subscribed till 1928-29. In fact, if you look at the Comintern documents between 1921 and 28, it said that to oppose and resist fascism, to struggle against fascism, we need a united front of the working class, which means that an alliance or a front between among revolutionary communists. It systematically talked about exposing social democracy, exposing revisionism as a trend which actually contributes to the rise of fascism. How it contributes to the rise of fascism, how revisionism and social democratic politics in general contributes to the rise of fascism, we'll come to that point a little later. But coming back to the Comintern strategy between 1921 and 1928, Comintern unequivocally said that united front of the working class is a united front against fascism, including all the revolutionary communist forces. And even though on different issues, issue-based alliances can be formed with not only social democratic parties, but also even some of the liberal bourgeois parties, a general anti-fascist front today cannot be made by taking every non-fascist force along with us. So this was the line of Comintern between 1921 and 1928-29. Between 1929-30 and 1933-34, in Italy and Germany, we witnessed the complete destruction of a very powerful and organized working class movement. A complete destruction of the working class movement due to the failure to oppose the fascist onslaught. This failure was owing to two reasons. One, the prevalence of economism and trade unionism and anarcho-syndicalism within the revolutionary communist movement. And second, the betrayal of social democracy and revisionism. That betrayal had started with the assassination of Rosa Luxemburg and Wilhelm Liebknecht itself. But this betrayal assumed new gigantic proportions in the late 1920s and 1930s, when the German League of, Federation of Trade Unions and its leader, I'm forgetting his name, I guess Carl Legion or something like that, openly talked about class collaborationism and preventing the working class from going beyond the limits of capitalist system, and suggesting the working class politics to be content with the decent economic rights and wage increments and benefits which the capitalism was able to provide in the period of prosperity, in the period of boom. But once you have trained the working class to measure its political gains simply by economic benefits and wage increments and pecuniary gains, then you have trained the working class not to go beyond this circular logic of pecuniary benefits. And when the capitalist system is in the stage of prosperity and boom, then even the bourgeoisie is mostly willing to strike a compromise deal with the labor, a compromise deal between capital and labor, where the labor will be provided with relatively better economic benefits and wages and social security, and in return, the labor will ensure industrial peace. So, a kind of a class collaboration, a kind of a class compromise. The bourgeoisie is able to bear the economic burden of such a compromise in the periods of boom. And in that period, social democracy also prospers, it thrives. But when the system is faced with a crisis, when the system in distress, the social democratic politics and social democratic organizations are at complete loss. Because now the bourgeoisie does not have that kind of surplus at its disposal so as to finance such a compromise between labor and capital. In that period, when the working class movement, systematically trained by social democratic politics to stubbornly cling with the economic rights and benefits provided by a capitalist system in the period of boom and prosperity, it refuses to give up its economic benefits and economic rights, and at the same time it refuses to go beyond the limits of capitalism, especially in the times of crisis when the limits of capitalist system are revealed before the masses. It stubbornly only clings to these economic rights and remains within the ambit of economism. Faced with such an organized workers' movement in the period of crisis, there is a strong reaction among the bourgeoisie due to this profit squeeze created in this situation. They are driven into the arms of fascism, they are driven into the arms of reaction, and they wholeheartedly and en masse support the fascist reactionary organization and politics. And in this way, social democratic politics, by you can say kind of sterilizing the working class movement and limiting the working class movement within the frontiers of economism and trade unionism and anarcho-syndicalism, it completely, snatches the revolutionary agency from the working class. And therefore, it is very important, as Comintern said, between 1921 and 28, that it is essential to expose social fascism. It is essential. Why it was called social fascism? Because fascism, the classical fascism, has its social base among the petty bourgeoisie. And social democratic and revisionist politics also has its social base among the small capitalist class, petty bourgeoisie, and the petty bourgeoisified sections of the working class, what we call labor aristocracy. That is the political agent of the bourgeoisie within the working class movement. So today, coming back to how Popular Front strategy was devised, when the working class movement was systematically destroyed, Dimitrov came up with the thesis of Popular Front in 1934-35 and said now the binary which faces the working class politics today in the present conjuncture is not the binary of socialism and capitalist democracy. It is the binary between fascist dictatorship and bourgeois democracy or people's democracy. So the immediate aim is not socialist revolution, even in those capitalist countries where fascist dictatorship has been established built on the destruction of working class movement, where fascist dictatorship has established and consolidated itself. There, the options that we have is not socialist revolution versus capitalism, but it is fascist dictatorship or people's or bourgeois democracy. Democracy versus dictatorship. And in that scenario, there was certain, justified reasons for such a policy. But even then, the application of Popular Front strategy in a mechanical fashion, against which Dimitrov himself had warned that this is a general policy, but you have to take into account the particular situation in each country. But since the communist movement did not do that, and the Popular Front strategy was implemented in a very mechanical fashion, various instances of class collaboration happened in the Eastern Europe, etc., etc. I cannot go into the detail of that. And even the concrete experience of implementation of Popular Front showed that very few radical bourgeois forces participated in the anti-fascist resistance in Spain, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Hungary, in Portugal. In all these countries, very small and very few sections of radical bourgeoisie parties actually, in practice, actively participated in the anti-fascist struggle. It was mostly the revolutionary communist forces primarily, and secondarily revolutionary anarchist forces, which actively participated in the anti-fascist struggle. Now, those who know the phenomenon of anarchism in India cannot even imagine what kind of revolutionary anarchism was in Europe. It was a thoroughly working class phenomenon, but it was not proletarian phenomenon. But the anarchist movement was based mostly in the working class there, not in the petty bourgeois intelligentsia like we have the situation in India. So these were the two forces. So Popular Front strategy did not work properly even in the 1930s and 1940s. And now today it cannot work at all. Today we need a new version of United Front of the working class. Point number one, we can make issue-based alliances with social democratic and revisionist parties, and not only social democratic organizations and parties, but also some of the bourgeois parties who are on a particular issue opposed to some fascist act or fascist politics. Like we allied with 120 civil society organizations, which included social democratic organizations as well as liberal bourgeois organizations, which talked about organizing citizens' vigilance on the day of counting, that we won't let the EC commit a fraud and steal the verdict of the people, even in the bourgeois elections. Anyway, so issue-based alliances can be formed with anyone, any non-fascist force. But a general anti-fascist front today cannot be formed by taking along various bourgeois, liberal bourgeois or radical bourgeois. There are no radical bourgeois forces anyway today, but liberal bourgeois forces and social democratic forces. A general anti-fascist front today can be a new version of United Front of the Working Class, which includes all the revolutionary communist organizations and revolutionary communist progressive individuals. Why I'm saying this? Today, the social democratic organizations can only prevent an anti-fascist front from going beyond the limits of bourgeois legality. And this is the concrete experience of all the anti-fascist front in the last 20 years. Whenever such anti-fascist fronts are ready to engage in a direct fight with the fascists on the streets, when they are ready to engage in street fights against the terror brigades of fascists, it is precisely these social democratic and revisionist parties which prevent such fronts from engaging in a direct fight with fascism. They instill the idea of constitutionalism, bourgeois legalism, and reformism, and act as a kind of a fetter in the feet of a truly radical anti-fascist front. And that is why this is the first reason. The second reason is that in the earlier 20th century, as we discussed yesterday, the bourgeoisie as a class has lost all progressive and radical, not all, but the remaining progressive and radical potential, democratic potential of the bourgeoisie has become now even, it's next to nothing. It has become negligible. who is going to fight with the revolutionary forces against fascism on the streets? Can you think that it will be Tejasvi Yadav, or can you think that it would be Mamata Banerjee, or can you think it would be Congress and Rahul Gandhi? Of course not. We know that is not going to happen. It would be kind of a very chaotic fantasization and living in a fool's paradise to think that Rahul Gandhi or Mamata Banerjee or Tejasvi Yadav or Akhilesh Yadav are going to engage in a truly radical revolutionary fight against fascism, in a direct fight against fascism. They can fight against fascism only within the ambits of bourgeois legality and parliamentarism. Beyond that, they can do the most they can do is Bharat Jodo Yatra. That is the ultimate frontier of anti-fascist activism of any bourgeois force today. So these are the three most important general political tasks. One is building a new revolutionary communist party. Two, building waves of militant mass movement based on the concrete issues of the people and based on a concrete program and concrete slogan. And third, building a new version of anti-fascist united front of the working class. Not exactly in the same way in which it was visualized between 1921 and 1928 by the Comintern, but by taking into consideration the elements of novelty that we witness in today's fascism. These are the three general political tasks that we are faced with today. Now, let me come to the particular task that a communist organization is faced with today. Since we are talking about the tasks of a revolutionary communist party today, a revolutionary communist organization today, the particular tasks. The first task, obviously, will be the task on the working class. This is the task of fighting against revisionism and social democratic politics within the working class movement, and also fighting against the anarchist and anarcho-syndicalist politics within the working class movement. Now, why we need that, I have already pointed to that. Why we need to fight against the revisionist and social democratic parties and the politics within the working class movement? Simply because it is precisely social democratic politics and ideology, the social democratic program and line, which prevents the working class from gaining the potency to fight against fascism by going beyond the limits posed by economism and trade unionism. The working class is systematically trained to gain its political measures by pecuniary and economistic logic, that is by measuring wage gains and economic benefit gains. When working class is systematically trained for that, the working class fails to implement a revolutionary mass line. It fails to constitute itself as a political class. It fails to organize itself as a class able to provide general political leadership to the people, to the masses. When the working class, this revolutionary agency of the working class is snatched, then you have already sold your soul to the devil. You have already lost the fight against fascism, because fascism is constantly going among the masses. Fascism is the fascist bourgeois leadership understands its general long-time political tasks, whereas the working class fails to understand its general long-term political tasks. It fails to collectivize the interests of the mass, different classes of the masses, and it only sticks to its own immediate economic particular interests and tasks. And this totally disarms the working class to gain the strength and gain the potency to fight against fascism. Why we also need to fight against anarcho-syndicalism? Because the basic logic of anarcho-syndicalism is also economism. This trend also, in a different way from revisionism, but this trend also gives primacy to the immediate particular economic interests of the working class, and from this it derives the conclusion that the working class does not need a vanguard party. One such trend in India is in Bengal. It is it goes by the name of its mass front Mazdoor Kranti Parishad. It uses the name of Krantikari Naujawan Sabha, I guess, KNS, among for its general work, and among the students, it is using the name of collective. This anarcho-syndicalist trend is basically subscribing to the idea of workers' opposition and left communist opposition, which emerged towards the end of the decade of 1910s after revolution in Soviet Union. Led by first, the left opposition was left by the people like Osinsky, Smirnov, and Bukharin. And later, this workers' opposition trend emerged in the Bolshevik Party, led by Shlapnikov and Kolontai. This trend says precisely, it doesn't openly say that we don't need a party, but it raises questions on the Bolshevik model of a vanguard party. It thinks that class can spontaneously develop a proletarian consciousness, and it confounds spontaneous workers' consciousness with proletarian consciousness. Spontaneous workers' consciousness is an ensemble of proletarian ideology, bourgeois ideologies, and petty bourgeois ideology. It's a spontaneous ensemble of various ideologies. So, if spontaneous workers' consciousness itself was always already proletarian consciousness, then there was no need for a vanguard organization. So they don't directly say, they try to organize the Communist Party as a self-organization group of the labor. This name is being used by some groups in Maharashtra also, self-organization group of the labor or workers. I don't remember the exact name. Both these tendencies are dangerous. Both these tendencies of revisionism and social democracy on the one hand, and anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism on the other hand, these are expressions of the broad tendency of economism within the working class. Economism is nothing but the infiltration of bourgeois ideology within the working class movement, where the working class is cut to size and it's bonsaied, and it is the revolutionary agency is smashed away from the working class by disabling and disarming the working class from becoming a political class, a vanguard class of the masses. So this is one of the most important tasks within at the workers' front that we face today, a revolutionary communist organization faces today. It is precisely this problem which makes the resistible rise of fascism. I'm using Bertolt Brecht's words from his play Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui. Fascism by itself, it characterizes a resistible rise. It can be resisted, but it becomes irresistible only by the failure of the working class to emerge as a political. Now, we come to the second particular task of a revolutionary communist organization. As we know, that the social base of fascism is the middle classes, the various echelons of the petty bourgeoisie, the entrepreneur petty bourgeoisie, which they run their enterprises based on their and their family labor. They don't exploit the wage labor, but they don't also sell their labor power to others. They organize what in census data is called own account entrepreneurs, OWS. These own account entrepreneurial petty bourgeoisie, the lower echelons of that, as well as the salaried petty bourgeoisie, the lower and middle echelons of the salaried petty bourgeoisie. It is the task of the communist revolutionaries to develop political propaganda and political organization in this class, because it is precisely this class which, going by its social class interests, is a potential ally of the socialist revolution. But in the absence of revolutionary communist propaganda among these different echelons, lower and middle echelons of petty bourgeoisie, it is the fascist politics which wins them over and builds a reactionary social movement of petty bourgeoisie which acts as a counterweight of the revolutionary working class movement. Why the petty bourgeois class is prone to fascist demagoguery? Why the petty bourgeois classes are prone to fascist propagandizing and fascist politics? There is a structural reason for that. The petty bourgeois classes are the classes which are not totally ruined and totally uprooted, but they are not also able to become, as a class, individual examples apart, as a class, neither they become totally abad, I mean, they don't become capitalist, even small capitalist as a class, and they are also, as a class, do not become totally proletarianized. So there is a constant threat of proletarization hovering above their head. They are constantly faced, especially in times of capitalist crisis. They are constantly faced with perpetual economic and social insecurity. They are constantly faced with the threat of proletarization, which is their worst nightmare. And due to this state of constant social and economic insecurity, there builds a constant irritation and anger amongst them. And these classes do not have access, to the knowledge that the force, the factor responsible for their economic and social insecurity is nothing but capitalism itself. It is precisely the capitalist system which creates this social and economic insecurity for the petty bourgeois classes. But since they don't have direct access to this knowledge, and since this knowledge becomes accessible to them only through communist propaganda, these classes are prone to fall to fascist ideology and politics. What the fascist ideology and politics does is simply this: it provides an imaginary and false enemy to the blind reaction which is simmering in the echelons of petty bourgeois. It says that if we make a Hindu Rashtra, if we go back to that, glorious past when there were no Muslims, everybody did their function, everybody was obedient, Dalits were obedient, women were obedient, they were fulfilling their functions, and then everything will be all right. There will be the reign of religion, dharm ka raj hoga, etc., etc. And right now, in order to achieve that glorious past again, to repeat that glorious past again, we need to come up with a final solution of the problem of Muslims. It is the Muslims who are the enemy. You can say that 14 crore Muslims mean 14 crore Hindu unemployed. They are taking away, and then it develops into myriad direction. It develops into cultural, ideological, political directions. They will say that they will take away your jobs, they will take away your daughters, they will take away your women, they will तुम्हारी जमीन पे कब्जा कर लेंगे, लैंड जिहाद करेंगे, लव जिहाद करेंगे, etc., etc. And this idea of a purely ideological community of Hindu Rashtra, which has nothing in common except one thing, that it is not Muslim. The members of this Hindu Rashtra are not Muslim.
Abhinav, we are not able to hear your voice. Have you stopped talking? If there is a problem, can you disconnect and reconnect? Yeah, friends, there is a problem. Okay, there is a power cut at Abhinav's place. He is rejoining from another source. So let's bear with this interruption, friends. Abhinav is rejoining from another source. There is a power cut. He will be back soon.
Comrades, hello.
Comrade Abhinav.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible now. There has been a break for the past 1 minute.
Electricity is gone here, so I was connected with a desktop computer. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Please carry on.
So shall I go on now?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So the second task is precisely developing a political work and political organization and social base among the lower and middle echelons of the petty bourgeoisie. Organizing these sections of the petty bourgeoisie on a socialist program and in the militant mass movement will strike a big blow to the fascist politics and fascist ideology. We were talking, about why petty bourgeoisie is prone to fascist demagoguery. So, faced with this constant insecurity and uncertainty, they immediately, due to this fatigue, due to this tiredness created by this constant social and economic insecurity, it drifts towards this fascist propaganda of seeing Muslims as enemy and believing in this image of false enemy. Secondly, petty bourgeois classes are always, they harbor various bourgeois ideology. For example, what various scholars of fascism like Anson Rabenbach and David Abraham, etc., they have talked about the ideology of, for example, what is called the myth of the ladder, or the ideology of status quo anti-capitalism. So since they cannot become capitalist, and since they are also oppressed and exploited by capitalists, they oppose big capital but not capitalism itself. And this particular status quo anti-capitalism is utilized by fascism. In fact, Swadeshi Jagran Manch, that old forum of RSS, did precisely that. They used even anti-capitalist demagoguery by targeting foreign capital and big capital, and they talked about saving small capital, the shopkeepers, the small entrepreneurs, etc. So on the one hand, they are proletarianization or becoming one with proletariat is one of the most despised idea for the petty bourgeois classes, but at the same time they are also faced with capitalist expropriation and capitalist uprooting, and they due to this binary of impacts, they are driven to an anti capitalism but status quo anti-capitalism. कि छोटी पूंजी बची रहे. The small capital is saved in that way. And the another important bourgeois ideology which percolates into the ranks of petty bourgeoisie is patriarchy. If you look at the strength and consolidation of patriarchal values in the middle class, it is much more than capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, or the working class. Why? Patriarchy as an institution is most important for petty bourgeois families. Patriarchal families have a much stronger economic register if you compare the role of patriarchal family in a bourgeois family or in a working class family. It has much more functional value in the patriarchal families. There you have a patriarchal father figure where as Wilhelm Reich in his study Fascism and Mass Psychology has demonstrated, the natural sexuality of women and children is suppressed. They are made to become subservient to a patriarchal father figure. Before him, they surrender their freedom in return of economic, social, moral, and religious security. And Wilhelm Reich very deftly shows how this patriarchal family father figure at the level of country can be replaced by a fascist Führer figure. मोदी को बाप ऐसे नहीं बोलते हैं बहुत सारे पेटी बुर्जुआ जो भक्त होते हैं, पेटी बुर्जुआ क्लासेस से आने वाले, because it is precisely the replacement of the patriarchal father figure at the level of family by a patriarchal fascist Führer figure at the level of the country or at the level of the society. So structurally they are prepared by these patriarchal ideologies to tail end the fascist ideology in politics. Now it is very
understandable that only building mass movements of middle classes on the issues of employment, inflation, etc. is not sufficient. The communist forces will also have to carry out the ideological propaganda and struggle against all these petty bourgeois ideologies and bourgeois ideologies which percolate into the ranks of petty bourgeoisie. Secondly, another element of communist propaganda in among the petty bourgeois masses, two elements, two elements of communist propaganda among the petty bourgeois masses include: one, the destruction of this idea of the glorified past, glorious past, constructed past like Ram Rajya, or Mussolini used the idea of reinstating the old Roman Empire where supposedly everything was going correctly, and or reinstating the idea of the great reign of great German race to be established all over the world as the supreme or superior race. They construct a glorious past. Now the problem with communist propaganda today is that when they claim that in ancient India, in Hindu India, everything was made, we made atom bomb, we made, the Rishi Munis were doing surgeries in the forest, it's all these ridiculous things. And when they say that this glorious Indian past is there, we just have to return to it, etc., etc., the communists adopt a very rejectionist attitude. Instead of laying their claim on the progressive and materialist and revolutionary traditions of ancient India, they whole soul reject the entire ancient Indian history and culture and civilization. Now, in any part of the world, the ancient history is also, or the story of ancient civilization also, is a story of class struggle. The struggle between the forces of progress and the forces of reaction. And ancient Indian past is no exception to that rule. So instead of laying our claim on the ancient Indian materialist revolutionary radical heritage like Ajivikas or the Lokayats or the Nyaya Darshan or the Vaisheshik Darshan or radical Buddhist philosophers like Dignath, Dharmakirti, Nagarjun, Vasubandhu, we wholesale reject the entire ancient Indian philosophy, ancient Indian. This is very dangerous. Instead of doing that, the communists should lay their claim on the progressive and revolutionary traditions of their own history, their own past. So this is one of the most important. Otherwise, the communists are always obliged to resort to Western examples to substantiate their ideas, their politics, and their ideological line. This is very problematic, and this is always used by reactionary, revivalist, and fascist forces against communists. The second element that I was talking about is in the communist propaganda among masses in general and among petty bourgeois masses in particular, is to completely expose the sham patriotism and the communal nationalism of the fascists. Now, the biggest enemy of the fascists is their history. If you look at their role in the independence struggle, if you look at their cowardice during the period of emergency, if you look at their role in different corruptions and scams of unprecedented gigantic scale in the past 20-30 years, then it becomes, and you'll find ample evidence of me, everybody knows that, trust me. If you look at all these incidents, if you reveal their historical role in various progressive movements, from national liberation movement to the movement of masses against emergency and all of that, if that is revealed and exposed in a consistent fashion, it hits the fascists where it hurts the most. It hits them at the point where it hurts them the most. It damages them the most. Why? Because fascist politics is always based on the aesthetization of things. Aesthetization of politics. As Walter Benjamin said, fascists aesthetize politics, communists respond by politicizing the aesthetics. It's a very, very important statement, and to understand the meanings and implications of this statement is very important for us. So when you attack at their chal chehra charitra, their beautification of their image, their aesthetization of their politics, and when you reveal the totally hollow and shallow character of their claims, and when you reveal their true character, their role in independence movement, their role in various progressive movements, their role even in the anti-6 genocide of 1984, and all of that, and their role in the various scams and corruption that happened during the reign of NDA during Vajpayee's time. Those who were already mature by that time, they might recall the name of Dilip Singh Judev or Bangaru Lakshman, who were caught red-handed in scams. So this is the real Chal Chehra Charitra of fascists. So this is another important element. They aesthetize politics, you politicize the aesthetic. We respond by revealing their true character, their true corrupt and true degenerate character, by resorting to the concrete facts of history. This brings me to the third task, which is whether our revolutionary propaganda, anti-fascist propaganda, will find resonance among the masses is not simply dependent on the truth of our propaganda. This is a very idealistic standpoint, that since our propaganda comprises of truth, since it represents truth, since it is based on truth, it will automatically find resonance among the masses. That is not true at all. Yes, it is true that if our propaganda, if our revolutionary politics, it's the politics of truth, it is one of the famous and favorite dictums of Lenin, that communism is true because it is true. Communism is correct because it is true. It represents the truth. It is the politics of truth. But this is only one part of the coin, one side of the coin. The other side of the coin, that unless and until the revolutionary forces have developed an organic social base among the sections and classes of the people, the extent to which their propaganda will find resonance will be limited to the advanced sections of the masses, the advanced elements of the masses. In order to make the revolutionary propaganda effective among the intermediate and backward sections of the masses, the communist forces must develop organic social support base among the classes and sections of the masses. Now, what does this mean? It simply means this: without revolutionary institutionalized reform work in the neighborhoods of the masses, the communist forces will not be able to carry out their counter-positional warfare and their counter-molecular permeation against the fascist politics. The fascists have performed a molecular permeation through their institutionalized work among the masses, from the structure of their shakhas to the gigantic network of their various reform institutions, from schools to hospitals, etc., etc. They have developed consolidated trenches and positions within the society. They have performed a molecular permeation within the ranks of the masses, and they have carried out a long protracted positional warfare against the forces of progress, against the working class, against the communist revolutionaries in this way. Now, this is something which the fascists learned from the communists. In fact, PSI was famous for this. The communists, the organization which existed immediately before PCI, most of the people in PSI were basically communists, but there were also anarchists and syndicalists and all. But communists were a major force in PSI, and they were the driving force of the policy of PSI, Italian Socialist Party, where the Italian Socialist Party developed a network of institutions in working class neighborhoods, in the neighborhoods of lower middle class, in the neighborhoods of semi-proletariat and all. And they used gyms and friends clubs and libraries and workers consumer cooperatives, etc., etc., for developing an organic support base. Mussolini learned precisely this methodology, and the fascist party implemented this methodology in a even better way and more intensively and extensively. And it was precisely this methodology that was later used by the German Nazis also. So, but it is not their invention. It is basically the communists which used to do it. Even in India, neighborhoods were used to be strongholds of the communists. If you look at the history of naval revolt, if you look at the post-independence working class history of Bombay, communists were well entrenched through their institutions and creative cultural work within the neighborhoods and within the ranks of petty bourgeoisie and lower middle class and working class. But it was precisely the reigning impact of economism and communists becoming limited to, in double quotes, concrete material struggles, economic struggles, and becoming becoming limited to the workplace politics and unions, and their complete withdrawal or their complete subtraction from the neighborhoods ultimately enabled Bal Thackeray and Shiv Sena to completely destroy the working class movement after the assassination of Krishna Desai in 1979. It was Shiv Sena was able to destroy such a strong, even though led by revisionists and economists, but a strong working class movement. One of the reasons, apart from revisionist politics, was this economistic tendency of withdrawing from the neighborhoods and solely focusing on the workplace. This is a very, very, very dangerous trend. It completely cuts the root of communist forces, and this was never the tradition of communist movement. If you look at the Bolshevik Party, if you look at the Chinese Communist Party, if you look at the German Social Democratic Party, if you look at the Italian Socialist Party and later Italian Communist Party, they were well entrenched in the neighborhoods. They used various creative methods and revolutionary reform work through institutional work to develop an organic social base in the neighborhoods. This today needs to be done very effectively. The communist forces need to carry out a counter-positional warfare and need to carry out a counter-molecular permeation within the neighborhoods, within especially the neighborhoods of the petty bourgeois masses, the semi-proletariat, the working class masses. And for that, a wide network of Janta clinics, Shahid hospitals, gyms, libraries, worker canteens, hearsay vehicle service, and friend clubs, youth clubs, sports clubs, libraries, etc., etc. A wide network of such institutions need to be developed. We know that to carry out this task on an extensive scale, we need a lot of resources, lots and lots of resources. But we should have trust in the masses. If the communists trust the masses also trust the communists. We should go among the masses, the progressive intelligentsia, such progressive teachers, doctors, etc., and mobilize funds to develop and organize this kind of institutional reform work. This is very, very important. It is essential for us to become intertwined with the masses at the organic level of neighborhoods. It is essential for us to become intertwined with them in such a way just as the threads of a carpet are intertwined with each other. With that kind of positions, we can use these positions for offensive purposes and for defensive purposes. With that kind of permeation, molecular permeation, we can build a structure which cannot be penetrated, which can play the role of people's fortress, a kind of a Jan Durg. And this is one of the most important tasks that a communist organization is faced with today. The fourth task, this brings me to the fourth task. There are many other tasks. I cannot finish the presentation within 10 minutes. I can try to finish that in 10 minutes. The rest of the things I can explain in the following discussion. The fourth important task comes from a lesson of history. If you look at the history of Italian fascism and German Nazism, they became the fascist movements. These fascist movements were not the only fascist movements in Europe. There were many other. In Scandinavian countries, there was a fascist movement. In Hungary, there was a fascist movement. In Portugal, there was a fascist movement. In some of the Balkan countries also, there was a nascent fascist movement. In France also, there was a fascist movement. In Germany and Italy also, there was a fascist movement. But only those fascist movements prevailed and rose to power, which developed from being a merely urban phenomenon into becoming a countrywide phenomenon, urban as well as rural phenomenon. That is, developing a social base and a structure of social props in the countryside. So if you look at the history of Nazism, it was precisely the winning over of the landlords of East LB. East LB was a province of Germany where, just like today's Haryana, Western UP, Punjab, where big capitalist kulaks, Junkers and farmers were there. And getting their support was one of the essential elements which, just a second. Yeah, getting their support was one of the essential elements which propelled Nazi party to power in Germany. Without that kind of rural linkage and support base and a structure of social props, Nazism could not have risen to power. In Italy, it was even more clear. The southern ex-latifundist, the feudal landlords which had been transformed into capitalist landlords, the Italian Junkers and kulaks, and capitalist farmers of northern Italy. These were in fact the first classes which organized quasi-fascist brigades in 1919 to suppress the movement of agricultural proletariat and poor peasantry. And the fascist party under the leadership of Mussolini successfully co-opted them. And in India also, if you look at the trajectory of development of Indian Hindutva fascism, it is very clear that till the end of the 1990s, Indian fascism too was in the main and in essence mostly an urban phenomenon. It was only since the last years of the 20th century, the last years of the 1990s, that fascism very swiftly developed its tentacles into the Indian countryside. Before that, their base in rural areas was very, very limited. But since the first years of the new millennium and since the last, the last years of the last millennium, they very swiftly developed into the countryside. And we must be very clear about the fact that in the rural areas, the agrarian bourgeoisie, it is whether it is today an ally of fascism in all states or not, that is a different thing. But potentially speaking, they are the natural allies of fascism. Just like any other faction of bourgeoisie. Rural bourgeoisie too is a faction of bourgeoisie. So capitalist landlords, capitalist Junkers and farmers, who are these people? Those who exploit the wage labor of others. Those who exploit the wage labor of others regularly and systematically are part of bourgeoisie. Whether they are a small capitalist, whether they are smaller than the big monopoly financial and industrial capitalist, it doesn't make them our allies. The reformist line of monopoly versus all is being put forth by this ridiculous organization called PRC CPI ML in Bihar and many other organizations, that monopoly versus all is the correct line of today. So we should ally with all, even the capitalist forces which are non-monopoly. So to ally with non-monopoly bourgeoisie and the working class, and how is that alliance going to function? I mean, the big bourgeoisie, the middle bourgeoisie and the small bourgeoisie, which regularly exploits the working class, which regularly exploits the poor peasantry through ground rent, through commercial profit and through interest. How are you going to establish a unity between them? This involves convincing the rural poor, that is the proletariat, the agricultural laboring class, and the poor peasantry and marginal peasantry, to give up their own class interests and ally with their class enemies. In the rural areas, if you look at the class struggle, it is the struggle between the big capitalist landlords, big capitalist farmers, big kulaks on the one hand, and the agricultural proletariat and the poor peasantry and lower middle peasantry on the other hand. In this struggle, if the corporate also is entering into the arena of agriculture, there is a contradiction between the big corporate. But in their contradiction with the working masses of countryside, this rural bourgeoisie is not going to side with the rural poor. It is going to side with the corporates. And it is precisely what is happening. On the one hand, they were fighting against corporate infiltration into the agriculture, but when the silos of Adani were open, the line of tractors of kulaks and farmers was there even in Punjab. So right now, the contradiction between the rural bourgeoisie, especially of Punjab and parts of Haryana and parts of Western Uttar Pradesh, is a contradiction on a particular economic demand, a particular economic issue. It doesn't mean that eventually they cannot be won over by this or that brand of reactionary politics. In Punjab, for a variety of other factors, it is very difficult for the BJP to directly win over the Punjabi kulak and big farmer class. They would win them over via some alliance. For example, they used to do through their alliance with the Akali Dal. But in Haryana and in Western UP, they have and they can directly win over the kulak class and the large capitalist farmer class. So they are the natural allies of fascism that we need to understand. To fight against that, we need to effect what is called political class differentiation in the countryside. In the lack of any revolutionary intervention, the rural poor, they tail end the rich kulaks and farmers. But this happens only in the lack of revolutionary intervention, because there is no other revolutionary agency available there. And even the so-called communist forces in various states, especially Punjab, they are totally kowtowing before the rural bourgeoisie, and they are totally tail-ending the rural bourgeoisie. In fact, many of the Punjab's communist parties, most of their ranks are filled by these kulaks and farmers who themselves are exploiters of wage labor. So their line and program is decided also by the composition of their cadre force and also their leadership, not only their cadre force but their leadership. So this must be very clear that the economic class differentiation, especially in the case of countryside, especially in the case of agrarian population, generally speaking, does not assume the form of political class differentiation automatically. To convert is unprecedented economic class differentiation in the rural areas. But in order to convert that into a political class differentiation, a revolutionary intervention is needed. A revolutionary communist intervention is needed. So it is very important to understand that unless and until the revolutionary communist force effects this political intervention and organizes the agricultural proletariat and marginal peasants on their particular demands, which are totally different from the demands of rich kulaks and farmers, and organizing the poor peasantry on the poor and lower middle peasantry on their particular demands. Their common demand is employment guarantee, free and equal education to all. That they also need. In fact, more than 70% cultivators who owned less than 2 hectares of land, they reported in a National Sample Survey Organization survey that at the first instance of opportunity of permanent government job, they will leave cultivation. They are sticking to cultivation only in the absence of any other method to ensure economic security for their and security of livelihood. Similarly, the particular demands of small farmers is the demand to decrease the cost price by imposing special cess and levies on the richer classes. It is the demand for developing a government network of irrigation by developing networks of canal and all. It is the demand for government purchase on prices which ensure average rate of profit, not surplus profit. MSP is a form of monopoly rent which ensures surplus profit over and above average rate of profit, and that is why it increases the prices of food grains. I cannot go into the detail of how this system functions here because that is not the topic. But these are the particular demands of poor peasants. So on these particular demands, which are completely opposed to the demands of kulaks and farmers, because kulaks and also this demand of system of institutional easy credit on low interest rate for poor farmers. This is a particular demand of the poor peasants. So we cannot simply say to the poor peasants, look, your destiny is ruination under capitalist system, directly involved in the struggle for collective farming and socialist program. Of course, this is the point of long-term socialist propaganda, but at the same time, we have to address their immediate problems, and their immediate problems are totally different from the problems of rich kulaks and farmers. And to articulate their separate program for poor peasants, separate program for agricultural proletariat and semi-proletariat is very important. Organizing them in separate poor peasant organization. That was the call of Lenin. Lenin said we need two things: agricultural laborers union and poor peasant committees. Without the poor peasant organizations, without that you cannot effect a political cleavage between the rich kulaks and farmers on the one hand and the poor peasants and agricultural proletariat on the other. This is a fourth most important thing. There are two other things. I will only name them because I'll finish my presentation there. One is developing a consistent movement of women liberation based along class lines, not on identitarian lines, and developing an anti-caste, class-based anti-caste movement which totally does away with pragmatic politics of Ambedkarism or any blend of Ambedkarite pragmatism and Marxism, just like Lal Salam, Neela Salam, or Red Star in the Blue Sky. This purple haze is exacting a heavy price, not so much for the Ambedkarites, but for the communist forces. So, to develop an anti-caste militant movement based along class lines, not along identity lines, is one of the most important, the sixth most important task. There are other tasks also, but I would finish my presentation here. These are some of the principal tasks that we are faced with today. I talked about 3 general tasks. I talked about 6 particular tasks. And there are some other tasks also about which I can talk in the following discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Abhinav. Please take a break. I have few announcements before we take questions. Friends, please post your questions. Those who are following the discussion on Discord, you can post your questions here in questions information text channel. Those who are following the discussion on YouTube and Facebook can post your questions in the comment boxes. We are running social media handles to share the talks and other information. Comrade Amulya has posted the links here. So those friends who cannot read Telugu, please excuse us, but you can see the links in English. And we are running WhatsApp groups to convey the information about the talks and also to share the resource material given by the speakers. So here is the link for WhatsApp groups. Please join the WhatsApp groups for receiving regular information and resource materials. And there is a open forum. If you see the list of text channels, there is an open forum where we can continue our discussions on various theoretical and practical aspects of Marxism, even when the session is not in progress. So, Comrade Abhinav, if you are ready, we have got the first question here in Discord from Avinash.
Yeah.
Can you please explain the two-line struggle in general and in particular with regard to fascism?
Two-line struggle is a term that is used specifically for the internal struggle of the communists. So if we are talking about, say, in general against fascism, it holds relevance in the sense that unless and until the two-line struggle within the communist movement is not carried to its culmination and a correct ideological and political line and a correct program is not established within the communist movement, we would be unable to fight against or wage a consistent and effective struggle against fascism. But there is no two-line struggle with fascism as such. It holds relevance only for the internal struggle within the communist movement.
Okay, Comrade Abhinav. So far, we have no questions. I think comrades are preparing their questions. In the meanwhile, since we have time, can you please continue talking on the last two topics that you just flagged and you could not explain since you didn't have time?
Yeah. So, pertains to the working class movement is focusing on the unorganized and informal sector. It is one of the most important tasks, in fact, because if you look at the data in India of all the workers, 93% of the workers are working in the informal sector. Bulk of it is there in the agricultural sector also, but there is a sizable portion, more than 80% of the industrial labor also is working as contract, casual or day wagers. So this informal working class becomes very important in today's fascist strategy because this is also the target of fascists. They are running constant communal propaganda in the working class neighborhoods, especially among the informal workers, and some of the elements of their brigades, some of the elements of their street terror gangs comes from this class itself, the informal working class and the lumpen proletariat. So this particular section of the working class has become, in general also, and in particular also vis-a-vis the fight against fascism, it has become very, very important. Now, there was a old prejudice about this informal working class, that it is primordial, it is not sufficiently proletarian, it has a rural backward linkage, etc., etc. But this was true only in the Fordist period. This is not true about the post-Fordist period, when the informalization is not the impact or lingering influence of some kind of backwardness. In fact, it is precisely the development of fragmented assembly line, post-Fordist assembly line, which has now spread over not even within a country, but across many countries. So you will come across various commodities like shoes, watches, washing machines, fridge, TV, etc., which are not assembled totally in one country. There is a global supply chain where a post-Fordist disintegrated assembly line functions, and this the capitalist system has become enabled to make good use of this due to two things: transport revolution and communication revolution. This has enabled the capital to emerge as a hunter and gatherer of cheap labor and cheap raw material. So if in manufacturing the same commodity, one part of this can be manufactured at a most on the most cost effective basis in Indonesia, it will be manufactured there. Another part is manufactured in Turkey, yet another part is manufactured in India, yet another part is manufactured in Bangladesh or some other country of global south, and they are assembled at a seventh or eighth country. So this has disintegrated the working class at the level of workplace. That is also why the strategy based on neighborhoods has become very important. So coming back to the main point, this class nowadays is not some primordial peasantist class characterized by backwardness of consciousness. In fact, it is, politically speaking, potentially much more advanced class. Why? Due to being footloose labor, working 6 months here, 3 months there, 2 months there, doing some own account entrepreneurship for 1 month, etc., etc. Peddlers, hawkers, doing that kind of job for some time, etc., etc. Due to this class does not see one owner as the enemy. It does not see one employer as the enemy. It is at a vantage point to see the class of employers as its enemy. So this is, politically speaking, it has a great potential of development of proletarian consciousness, and it also understands the state much more succinctly, not as a third actor above classes. That if you go, India has an industrial relations system characterized by tripartism, what the academicians have called tripartism, that there is a side of labor, there is a side of capital, and as a great mediator, there is a state above classes. Organized worker is more prone to this ideological view of labor capital relationship. The informal, unorganized working class is in a much better position to see state as a representative of the class of employers, the bourgeoisie. So this class has become very, very important today. Not only generally in anti-capitalist struggle, but also the particular anti-fascist struggle, because this is also the class which is a target group for the fascist forces. The ninth important element of anti-fascist strategy raises the question of resisting the fascist terror tactic. Now, today, if you look at the progressive movement in general, they resort to what I called reactive spontaneity. Reactive spontaneity is, what is reactive spontaneity? Reactive spontaneity is waiting for the fascist forces first to attack and then involve in some symbolic struggles. symbolic struggles like holding candlelight vigil, while at the same time also talking about the democratic rights of fascists. If you remember the JNU struggle, Kanhaiya Kumar categorically said that we also support their democratic right. They also have a right to say things, and we are totally against totalitarian regimes like Stalin and Mao, and we support their democratic right also. This is ridiculous. If you look at, I quoted this Nazi leader yesterday, you cannot reason with them. Wilhelm Staples said in his work Christendom National Socialismus, that was the name of his work, Christentumund National Socialismus. He said that no, national socialism cannot be countered with arguments. Arguments could only be effective if the movement had grown by arguments. So British workers and European workers understood this fact very well. They said that the only way to argue with a fascist is to acquaint his head with the pavement. There is no other way to argue with a fascist. So to counter the fascist terror, the working class movement from the very beginning, the revolutionary communist movement from the very beginning needs to build grassroots organizations like Bhagat Singh brigades, Sukhdev brigades, which can actually fight on street against the fascist terror brigades like Bajrang Dal, Vihip, and all these forces. I'm just going to quote Gramsci here. Gramsci superbly and brilliantly understood this. Gramsci said, and I quote, "Fascism has never maneuvered when faced with a massive mass movement in the streets. Rather, it waits to move until working class organization had entered a period of passivity and then fell upon it, striking it as such, not for what it did, but for what it was." This is from Gramsci's writing Democracy and Fascism. It was written in 1924. So Gramsci very clearly said that communist must go beyond reactive defensism and the fire brigade methodology of anti-fascist activities. For example, we wait for something to happen and then move to symbolically oppose it. That is not going to work. And our organization has actually put this thing into practice, and we have seen whenever fascists are faced with militant mass opposition and resistance which is ready to engage in a direct fight, they still might fight with the cover provided by state apparatus, but generally they also retreat. There was an event, I think in 2006-7, when they attacked the Janchetana book exhibition van in Delhi University, and when they found that we were also ready with clubs and all to fight with them, they simply raised some slogans, and there was a stalemate positional sloganeering, and then they went away. This is very important. And the last important element of anti-fascist strategy is that revolutionary communists must resist every fascist attack on civil and democratic rights. Lenin had emphasized again and again that on the one hand, the revolutionary communist politics must expose the illusions of bourgeois democracy and show to the common working masses that it is actually the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, while at the same time it must defend each and every civil and democratic right that has been won by a class struggle in which working class made equal and perhaps greater sacrifices than the bourgeoisie. Moreover, he also stressed upon the fact that bourgeois democracy is the best battleground for proletarian class struggle. Therefore, in the present fascist rise also, where unlike the 20th century European fascism, the form of parliamentary bourgeois democracy is not openly changed into dictatorship, though the content of this bourgeois democracy becomes more and more like a dictatorship, we need to oppose the gradual fascist destruction of civil and democratic rights and liberties, as well as make the working class particularly conscious of the need to defend these rights. Lukács had rightly warned against the left tendency of not understanding the importance of defending the civil and democratic rights inch by inch and preparing for some ultimate and decisive future class struggle only. The shrinking democratic space will make it even more difficult to organize the working class. So the lack of committed fight against the fascist onslaught against civil and democratic rights will ultimately also disarm the revolutionary communist forces as well as the working class movement. That is why it is very essential to establish the proletarian hegemony in movements like the great movement that we had against CA and NRC, to win over and take the leadership from the hands of Islamist forces and prevent this movement from becoming, in double quotes, a Muslim movement. Our line was clearly to give this movement a class character, that it was not simply against Muslims. These acts and NRC, they were against the working masses from all religions, all religious communities in general. So these are some of the elements that were that I could not finish in the original discussion. So yeah, here I will end it.
Yeah. That's a great addition, Comrade Abhinav. We have a question from Ibrahim Husseini. Can you explain the role and political line of mass organizations, students' organizations?
Yeah, so first we need to understand in general the function of mass organization. What do the mass organization, whether of the students or the youth or the working class, like trade unions, what is their function and place in overall revolutionary politics? Let's be very clear about it. The role of the mass organization is to fight on the day-to-day demands of different classes and sections of the masses and develop these struggles in order to over-identify with the democratic promises of the capitalist system, which the capitalist system itself cannot fulfill, over-identifying with those promises and building militant mass movement by this over-identification to bring the system to a point of impossibility. Only by radicalizing constantly these militant mass movement against capitalism, you can win over the intermediate and backward section of the masses on the socialist program. Why I am saying this? When you do revolutionary communist propaganda, you win over advanced elements from among the petty bourgeois intelligentsia, even from the bourgeoisie sometimes. But if we are talking about winning over elements from classes as a whole, then petty bourgeois intelligentsia, working class, semi-proletariat, etc., and even peasantry, lower and middle peasantry, you will win over in the first round through revolutionary propaganda alone, the advanced or the what we can call the immediate vanguard among the masses, the immediate vanguard elements or advanced elements among the masses. That is the task of doing revolutionary propaganda. The task of revolutionary agitation, that is building mass organizations and militant mass movements, is simply this: the intermediate and backward elements cannot be won over by the revolutionary propaganda alone. They learn about the necessity of socialism and socialist programs through the combination of revolutionary propaganda and the actual experience of their mass struggles. So, if we want to win over the backward and intermediate sections of the masses, we need to over-identify with the unfulfillable democratic promises of the bourgeois system and build militant mass movement, in the process of which, step by step, the intermediate and backward elements realize increasingly the need for a socialist system. They realize the limits of capitalism. They understand the limits of the capitalist system and understand the fact that they don't have a future within the system. In order to gain sustainable livelihood, economic and social security, they need to move beyond the limits posed by the system. Now these limits or frontiers are revealed in the same proportion in which the mass movements assume an anti-capitalist militant character. So the task of the mass movements and mass organizations as such is to bring the capitalist system to a point of impossibility by winning over the intermediate and backward elements of masses who understand through their own concrete material experiences of mass struggle for their day-to-day demands, the fact that capitalist system cannot fulfill their demands. So that is the overall function of mass struggles, mass movements, and mass organizations. And the role of the Communist Party is to organize these scattered and fragmented mass movement in giving them one unitary political program and bringing them under the umbrella of a general revolutionary political movement, not particular mass movement, but a general revolutionary political movement. Here also, as I said before, we need to understand the dialectic of mass and class.
So yeah, that's a great explanation. While our friends are typing their questions, RK has sent his question on Discord. Firstly, many thanks for such systematic presentation of your analysis. I have plethora of questions. I shall try to confine to few. Okay, he's preparing his questions. Then in the meanwhile, I have a question on your sixth particular task, class-based anti-caste movements. So you spoke about purple haze. So what is this purple haze and what are the causes for this purple haze and how can we save working class movement from this haze?
Yeah, there is a funny story behind this. During the Occupy UGC movement, there was a cadre from CPIM and Liberation. After my speech, he came to me and he said that, comrade, why don't you realize what would happen if the red and the blue is mixed? I said, if you mix red and blue, you will get purple. That's all. Nothing more can happen. So from there, I came up with this term of purple haze. Now, the purple haze is basically problematic because we are all for forming alliances with genuine and honest Ambedkarite organization on each and every issue of anti-Dalit oppression and Brahminical, the functioning of Brahminical, the actions of Brahminical politics and Brahminical ideology. Issue-based alliances we have also formed in Maharashtra, in Delhi. We have formed with various genuine democratic Ambedkarite organization. But to form issue-based alliances with Ambedkarite organization on particular instances of anti-Dalit atrocities and to mix Marxism as an ideology and politics with the Ambedkarite ideology in politics is not going to give any positive result. It will only confuse all the things and it will disarm the communist movement, because by capitulating and implementing a compromising or a collaborationist attitude at the level of ideology and politics, if we mix those two things, then the question of science is obliterated. Marxism is a science. And if you cannot say that, okay, the theory of gravitation is correct, but in order to build a broader unity, let's mix it somehow with Church's explanation of the origin of universe or the movement of planetary bodies. You can't do that. It is impossible to do that. So it is very important to understand that at the level of ideology and politics, there can be no fusion. At the level of real political mass movements, there can be issue-based alliances. And even genuine Ambedkarites are not so much inclined for this mixture. It is only the capitulationist and collaborationist, revisionists and left adventurists and left opportunists who are talking about this mixture. There can be no mixture at the plane of pragmatism and Marxism. And Ambedkarism is nothing but pragmatism. And two basic defining characteristic features of pragmatism is, number one, the state is the great mediator. All changes happen due to the action of the state. You read the speech of Ambedkar in the first Mahad conference, where Ambedkar clearly says that what happens in the society is determined by what the government thinks and does. And therefore, we should focus on sending our people into the government jobs, number one. And secondly, asking the government for extra land which can be given to the Dalits. So he was not asking for radical land reforms and expropriation of feudal landlords. And when the expropriation of feudal landlords at the level of at least promulgating a law was done, it was Ambedkar's idea that some kind of compensation or privy purse should be given to this class of feudal landlords and the princes and kings. So it is very important to understand that at the level, and the second defining feature of pragmatism, that all change is gradual and incremental. That is one of the basic features of pragmatism, and Ambedkar was very clear about it. So I would say I can send some articles and some papers which critiqued the political thought of Dr. Ambedkar in this group. I cannot dwell more upon this because there are more questions.
Yeah, we have many questions. So RK, there are many questions from RK. Comrade, try to make your questions precise. I'm taking RK's first question. How do we broadly separate or segregate the fascist and the neoliberal political characteristics of NDA? The background to this question is if the bad performance of BJP and better performance of India alliance in the elections truly a situation to feel relieved. If so, how can we qualitatively and quantitatively see India's win better than NDA's win? How do we see it qualitatively different from exploitation of the Indian masses in the name of caste, minorities by India Alliance or other central and regional government parties? I hope it's
Okay, so
a bit
this
long.
question has been articulated in a very imprecise way. So I uh, don't get the essence of the question, but from whatever I can make from the question, I would try to answer. One, the fascist neoliberalism is a set of economic policies. It's a particular political economy of bourgeoisie in the age of imperialism, late phase of imperialism. So that set of economic policies necessitates a particular kind of political system. That political system can be a non-fascist bourgeois government which has lost most of its democratic potential, but this kind of system has its limits. If the crisis comes to the hilt, if it is intensified beyond a certain point, the non-fascist bourgeois government are unable to implement the neoliberal economic policies at the same rate at which it is desired by the bourgeoisie. So we need to make a distinction between the neoliberalism in general and fascist politics on the other hand. And I don't think we should feel relieved that India performed better, much relieved. Of course, the performance of BJP saw a dip, and that gives, of course, naturally, it gives a lot of pleasure to us. But to feel relieved and to feel pleased about it are two different things. The reason is that when it was precisely when Hitler's mandate decreased in the last election before ban on bourgeois elections and ending of parliaments and legislative assembly, it was precisely the declining star of fascists in Germany which made them more aggressive. The second possibility that I talked yesterday was precisely about this. We cannot take it for granted that just because BJP's mandate has been, it has shrunk, it will be less aggressive. It can become even more aggressive and resort to some kind of tactics of Reichstag fire, organizing some attack on some government institution or parliament or something like that, some secretariat, something like that, or an attack on some fascist leader, maybe even Modi. In that sense, we should be prepared for that. So there is no need to be relieved. There is no, in fact, it would be very dangerous. And how do we see it qualitatively different from exploitation of the Indian masses in the name of caste minority by India Alliance or other? See, as far as the various forms of social oppression that are concerned, which you can see even in during the government or during the rule of any Congress government or India Alliance or anything like that, BJP's government only intensifies that. If you look at the rate of anti-Dalit atrocities in the last 10 years, there is a qualitative difference. If you look at the anti-women crimes in the last 10 years, there is a qualitative difference. If you look at the mob lynching and riots, anti-Muslim riots in India in the last 10 years, there is a qualitative difference. So they will only enhance. Oppression of Muslims is a very particular thing, but even other minorities and Dalits, their oppression assumes new dimensions under a fascist rule, because Brahminical ideology and patriarchy are two ideologies of social oppression which are constitutive elements of fascism. So from what I understood from the question, this is the answer that I can give.
Yeah. Okay, comrade. So we have a policy here. If there are many questions from a single member, we'll take the next questions after taking the first question of the other members. So now there is a question from Jani Edanapudi and Discard. In the background of large agricultural sector in India, only a united movement of workers and farmers against bourgeoisie can yield results in the fight against exploitation, rather than only working class movements. why why is Indian Communist movement not focusing on this united struggle?
Uh, First of all, I would say that Indian Communist movement committed both mistakes. On the one hand, even in the colonial period, there was an experiment by communist movement of forming a worker peasant party. And even after independence, two mistakes were committed. On the one hand, there were economistic, trade unionist, revisionist parties, which more or less an anarcho and anarcho-syndicalist parties within the ML movement, which ignored the necessity to organize the poor and middle peasants and winning them over on the socialist program. And on the other hand, we have a tendency where working class interest was completely sacrificed and surrendered due to a peasantist deviation and not understanding that peasants are not a homogeneous and monolithic body, especially under capitalism. They're a highly class differentiated entity. Peasantry in itself is not one class. When we are talking about peasants, we'll have to determine which peasants are we talking about. 86% of the peasants in India have less than 2 hectares of land. So if we are talking about these peasants, of course, there is a need for a united movement of workers and peasants. There is a need for what Lenin called Smichka, Worker Peasant Alliance. But this Worker Peasant Alliance cannot be the alliance of workers and entire peasantry, because this peasantry also has a class of capitalist kulaks and farmers. There is no unity of interest between the two. But Indian Communist movement not only committed the mistake of not focusing on this united struggle and focusing only from a workerist economistic perspective only on the working class struggle, it also committed the mistake of totally going into a peasantist direction and totally surrendering the working class politics in order to win over the entire peasantry, including the rich capitalist farmers and kulaks, by surrendering the proletarian politics and ideology. So I think you have talked about only one aspect of the problem. There is a totally diametrically opposite aspect of the problem also, and there is a unity between the two. Unity because here we don't understand the class structure of Indian society, and due to the mistake of not understanding the role of working class becoming a political class, that is constituting itself as a political class, is necessary for winning over the poor sections of the working sections of the peasantry. So the main reason again is the inability of the Indian Communist movement to develop a correct ideological and political line and a program, number one, and number two, the inability to develop a revolutionary mass line. These are the two mistakes due to which the Indian Communist movement failed to develop a dialectical understanding of this question.
Okay, Rohil on Discard. Can you please explain the development of the theory of the party from Marx to Lenin's times and any further developments? Also, please suggest any texts or debates surrounding this. I think he's asking you to take one more session.
Oh yeah, well, I was exactly going to say this is such a big, very good, very important question, but it's very difficult to answer this. But I will try to say a few things. One, in the period of Marx and Engels, the party principle developed where Marx clearly said one thing: there can be many workers' parties, but there can be only one communist party. This is a very important point. Communist party in the sense that there cannot be many proletarian organizations. The proletarian organization can only be one. Whether it has not developed up to this time doesn't matter, but a proletarian organization or communist party armed with a correct ideological and political line and program cannot be many. It can only be one. Lenin developed the very structure of Communist Party with the theory of democratic centralism, which had seeds in the German social democratic movement itself. In Kautsky itself, we find seeds of that theory when Kautsky was still a Marxist, revolutionary Marxist. But with Lenin, this theory reaches a new level where Lenin very clearly stipulates one basic thing. Lenin says that in a capitalist society, all classes, if you talk about any class, no class is homogeneous or monolithic. Bourgeoisie, let's take bourgeoisie first. Bourgeoisie is a class which is constituted as a class by averaging of the rates of profit. As Marx said, that the hostile brotherhood of the bourgeoisie comes into existence in the market. In the market, there is a competition. Competition for what? Competition for underselling their commodity. That underselling of commodity and the competition between different capitalists leads to the averaging of the rate of profit, and this averaging of the rate of profit leads to constitution of bourgeoisie as a social class. So the basic constitutive principle of the formation and constitution of bourgeoisie is competition, and that is why bourgeoisie is always divided along many lines. Bourgeoisie of different sectors, big monopoly bourgeoisie, non-monopoly bourgeoisie, among non-monopoly bourgeoisie, big bourgeoisie, and middle and small bourgeoisie, sectoral different textile bourgeoisie is there, heavy industry bourgeoisie is there, light industry bourgeoisie is there, chemical industry bourgeoisie is there, agrarian bourgeoisie is there, commercial bourgeoisie is there, financial bourgeoisie is there. So among these different factions of bourgeoisie, by its very nature, different factions always think about their immediate particular economic interest. And that is why bourgeoisie needs a party. What is the function of of the bourgeois party? Number one, and the most important function, is collectivization of scattered bourgeois particular economic interests into a general political interest. That is the function of bourgeois party. Now, bourgeoisie by nature needs many parties due to a variety of factors. One, that the very nature of bourgeoisie is that its constitutive principle is competition. And second, bourgeois rule characterizes the rule of a minority over majority. An exploitative minority over the working majority, and that is why one mask is not sufficient. One mask often loses its potency after 5 years of rule, one party, and then another party is given the rule after 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, whatever. So that is why they need many parties. But the proletariat also is divided along the lines of skilled and unskilled, educated and uneducated, women and men. Different forms of social oppression also divide the working class, and therefore working class also needs a collectivization of its particular interests. Moreover, capitalist competition is imposed upon the working class in the labor market. There also, they compete with each other. They are obliged and compelled to fight with each other and compete with each other. Due to this, proletarian interests are also spontaneously assume only the form of different sets of particular economic interests, and that is why proletariat also needs a party to collectivize. But proletarian needs only one party, because the basic organizing principle or constitutive principle of proletariat is not competition. It is collectivity. Why? Proletariat represents in the productive forces the element of socialized production, and that is why proletariat does not need many parties. And the second reason is that proletarian dictatorship characterizes the rule of exploited and oppressed majority over the exploitative minority, and that is why both the classes need parties, but bourgeoisie needs many parties and the proletariat needs one party. So this party principle in this developed form was developed by Lenin, and the internal organizational principle of democratic centralism, which simply means that till the political and ideological line and program are determined, complete democracy. Once the political and ideological line and program has been determined by the majority of the party, then complete centralism. Even minority is obliged to implement the same program. That is the basic political principle of democratic centralism. Then there are structural elements of how this structure functions. The highest body is the party congress. Between two party congresses, central committee is the highest body. All committees are subordinated to their higher committees, and all committees are subordinated to the central committee, etc., etc. Minority has the right to carry on the two-line struggle through intra-party circulars and organs, etc., etc. All of that you can read in many places, and Comintern's 59-point program of 1921 and Lenin's what is to be done, one step forward, two steps back, etc. But I think it's a very big question and requires a separate discussion. I tried to answer this in short form.
You try to keep it as possible, but still, no, we have many questions, so let us try to be even briefer. Blackbeard and Discard, what is your opinion of the Bodhist or ICP line of completely keeping aloof from a large anti-fascist movement?
I will have to read about this. I read about Bordiga a long time ago, but his line was basically a left line. It's a left line of keeping aloof from large anti-fascist movement. That only I can say. But as Mao said, no investigation, no right to speak. As long as I don't revisit Bordiga's theory, I cannot comment more on this question.
Okay, comrade. Sujan and Discard, one facet of fascism is its attack on scientific ideas and scientific way of thinking. Would you be able to comment on the role of people's science movements and the direction that they have to take?
Yeah, it's such an important thing because I missed this point. In fact, in my book, What is Fascism and How to Fight It, in the task, I have made it a separate point. That is the point of proletarian rationalist propaganda. Proletarian rationalist propaganda, why is it important? This is such a beautiful question. Thanks, Sujan, for this. Because, see, there was a debate in the European communist movement whether fascism is a modern phenomenon or a pre modern phenomenon. One section said fascism is a pre-modern phenomenon because it uses primordial ideologies that came into existence before the rise of capitalism, like communalism or racism, etc. But the more correct position was held by the Marxist Leninist in that debate. This said, and I am giving my own words to their articulation, it is it is a modern critique of modernity. Fascism, ideologically speaking, it is a modern critique of modernity. Why I am saying this? It is a modern critique because fascism is a product of the stage of imperialism when bourgeoisie, large sections of bourgeoisie have become bereft of all democratic potential, and now they are. It is reaction all the way in this period, and in this period, the ideologies of Spengler and Nietzsche of anti-humanism. Nietzsche was a modern philosopher, but he presented a modern critique of modernity. An an anti-modern critique of modernity, but it was a modern anti-modern critique. So, in that sense, it is what fascism does in a very modern way. It uses the primordial ideologies, not in itself primordial, but which came into existence in the pre-capitalist period, and it uses those social ideologies of oppression, those anti-rationalist and anti-enlightenment and anti-scientific and anti-humanist ideologies, an ensemble of that for a very modern purpose, establishing, in the words of Dimitrov, the most brutal dictatorship of the most reactionary faction of the big financial industrial bourgeoisie. So it employs all these these ideologies which came into existence in the pre-capitalist period, but in a very modern fashion and for a very, very modern purpose. So modernity itself and enlightenment itself had two elements. If you read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, Engels talks about the progressive heritage as well as the regressive heritage of enlightenment. So fascism uses the regressive heritage of the modernity and enlightenment ideals and uses it for its own political ends. Now, here it becomes very important not just to revive the Enlightenment ideals by going back to the 18th or 18th century in the period of Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, etc., or Holbach or D'Alembert. You cannot go back in that period, and the point of departure of these Enlightenment philosophers was different, and that is why what we have called for is proletarian renaissance and proletarian enlightenment. You cannot fulfill the task of future, that is the task of fighting against the irrationalist tendency of fascism and its tirade against reason and rationality and science. You can fight against this by learning from bourgeois enlightenment, but situating the renewal in a proletarian context. So a proletarian renaissance enlightenment, it is very essential, very important, constant, propagation of reason, rationality from a proletarian standpoint. And here also the children front and youth front becomes very important. A constant project of progressive generation building has to be undertaken by the fascism. It is part of that task that I mentioned earlier, revolutionary reform work, institutionalized reform work. So it is very important, and I'm glad you raised this question.
Thank you, Abhinav. Professor Anjaya has complimented you for an excellent presentation, and then he has a question. There is a criticism against Indian Marxists that they could not understand Indian reality, as made by D.D. Koshambi, Romila Thapar, R.S. Sharma, Irfan Habib, Suvira Jaiswal, D.N. Jha, etc. Please comment.
Yeah, I think openly it was mainly D.D. Kosambi who said this and termed the traditional communist movement as official Marxist. Because D.D. Kosambi did not agree with CPI's and then later communists' characterization of Indian social formation as a semi-feudal, semi-colonial social formation. And he also did not agree with their characterization of Indian bourgeoisie as a comprador bourgeoisie. So it is true that these Marxist historians have done much better analyses as compared to the Communist Party if we are talking about the analysis of Indian history, the evolution of Indian social formation from the colonial period to the post-colonial period, the analysis of the caste system and its articulation by different modes of production that came into existence in the Indian social formation. These historians have done excellent work, and there are some limitations also. For example, in the case of Irfan Habib, there is an article, for example, a famous paper, Potentialities of Capitalist Development in the Pre-British India. It is there in Irfan Habib's book called Essays in Indian History. It's a very good paper. And Irfan Habib analyzes the potentialities of capitalist development and potentialities of development of manufacturing, etc., in the pre-British India, and then says no, but still they were not sufficient, these tendencies, and Indian social formation needed an external force of colonialism to break the pre-capitalist social formation. So he reaches the same old theory of Asiatic mode of production, which Marx himself had given up when he was taking notes from Kovalevsky's book Russian Landholding, where Marx clearly said that our old idea that Asiatic mode of production is characterized by the lack of internal motion, and therefore there is the need of an external force to break this stasis or this stagnation, and only then capitalism can develop. And in this way, partially speaking, Western colonialism had a positive role, but negative role was greater than positive role. That's what Marx's line was. But Marx gave up this theory of Asiatic mode of production. He could not write a separate book about it, but he gave this theory up. And this also we came to know about from Irfan Habib's writing. His introduction to Tulika's collection Karl Marx on India, if you read that introduction, Irfan Habib himself says that Marx gave up this theory, but he never corrected his position in that article, Potentialities of Capitalist Development in Pre-British India. So there are many things we can learn from Indian Marxist historiography, and there are many points on which, despite having official affiliation with this or that communist party, like R.S. Sharma Irfan Habib clearly has a affiliation with CPM, even though he writes in a much autonomous fashion. There are many points on which these historians diverge. So we also suggest reading historians like Kosambi, Romila Thapar, R.S. Sharma, Irfan Habib, Suvira Jaiswal, D.N. Jha, K.M. Shrimali, and all these people. But you have to read these writings also with a pinch of salt. So the best compass in that sense is systematic training in Marxist science, that is historical materialism, and Marxist philosophy, that is dialectical materialism. Personally, I feel Kosambi, R.S. Sharma, and Suvira Jaiswal are outstanding. So I learned a lot from them as a historian also, because by academic training I am a historian. So I would suggest all comrades read them.
Thank you, Abhinav. Chiku and discard. In the future scenario, within brackets, which is possible, where a fascist regime takes control of the Indian state, leading to a severe suppression of democratic rights, similar to the situation in Germany during the Nazi era, what strategies and tactics should be employed to to effectively resist and counteract this regime in the future?
Yesterday also I said that there is a faint possibility of that happening, but that would be the end game for fascism. If they give up the shell of bourgeois democracy, they ban bourgeois elections in parliament and legislative assembly, then that would be the end of the road for them. And of course, a strategy against them, such a situation, our strategy would be to build revolutionary militant movement, the revolutionary militant mass movement, as well as a movement to organize all these mass movement. But even then, in present scenario, our immediate aim would not be to restore bourgeois democracy, because the restoration of bourgeois democracy was on the agenda during the Popular Front period, because bourgeois democracy still had some democratic potential. If it happens today, our call immediately also will be for socialist revolution, not for some bourgeois democratic revolution. So, but this, in my own, as if you ask my opinion, I don't think either is there a need for that, for the fascists to do something like that, nor is that desirable. I think if even Modi Shah combined due to relative autonomy from fascist organization try to do that, RSS would be the first to object, as far as I can see. They understand, their think tanks understand it in a much better historical fashion, that once we do away with the shell of bourgeois democracy, the only result or destiny that we are faced with is complete destruction and to be thrown away out of the stage of history for a long time. I don't see that possibility as a major possibility.
Okay. I'm coming back to RK's question. I am combining his second and third question. In the current Indian context, how do we define proletariat in the neoliberal democracy? What sections of the society do we encircle, especially from the current social structure of so-called middle class? And do we have quantitative sections and statistics? I will also take his third question. You can respond. Yeah. In the context of neoliberal globalized economy, how is World Proletariat and Revolutionary Communist Party identified and connected to Indian Proletariat Communist Party? Are they separate or unified in fight against global fascism in general and Indian fascist threat in particular?
So, we don't need to change the definition of proletariat in the neoliberal period. Proletariat is same as Marx defined. Anyone who has nothing to lose but his chains, that is, they have nothing but their labor power to sell. They are proletariat. Now, proletariat has many parts. It has people who are mainly involved in manual labor. There are people who are mainly involved in mental labor. And there is a large class of proletariat which has no property in the sense of capital, which can be capitalized, which can be used as capital, because there is a big confusion among many communists about personal property and private property. If you read Engels' housing question, this question becomes very clear. For example, a house is a good for individual consumption. It becomes capital only when it is, for example, rented out or sold, and the money is used for capitalization and exploitation of surplus wage labor. But there are things, for example, personal clothing, etc., personal items. These are not capitalist private property. There is personal property and there is private property. So proletariat, many sections of proletariat might have a small house in village. Are they proletariat? Yes, they are, because they are not using for renting it out and taking a share of the produced surplus value in the form of rent, ground rent. Or similarly, you can apply the same principle to other cases also. But apart from the class which we can call purely proletariat, there is semi-proletariat also. There is a part of working class which is proletariat so far as it sells its labor power to some capitalist employer, but it also holds a small piece of land in village which it has given for sharecropping, or it has rented out. Then it is semi-proletariat. Why semi-proletariat? That renting out or sharecropping is not the principal source of his livelihood. His principal source of his livelihood is wage labor. For example, if you look at the poor peasantry, 75% of its income, almost 75% of its income comes from wage labor, and rest of the 20-25% incomes comes from cultivation. So how do you characterize it? It is semi-proletariat. Why semi-proletariat? Why not simply middle class or upper echelons of petty bourgeoisie? Because the principal means of livelihood is not cultivation but wage labor. Then there is petty bourgeois class, the salaried petty bourgeois class, for example, school teachers or professors or highly placed bureau head clerk or elements who are salaried personnel in the bureaucracy. There are two sections. One, where we can simply call them proletariat. They are doing mental labor, but they are only getting the value of their labor power as salary. But there are higher echelons of bureaucracy, which are not simply getting the value of their labor. They are selling their labor power, but in return, they are not simply getting the value of their labor power, but also a part of appropriated surplus value by the bourgeoisie. They are functionaries of bourgeoisie and they are functionaries of the capitalist class. So in that sense, it is very difficult to draw a very clear line of demarcation. Neither Marx did that, not Lenin did that. In Poverty of Philosophy, Marx said that economic categories are abstraction of social phenomena. You cannot see economic categories walking in the real society. You can see a very complex, articulated social phenomena. Economic categories are still important because they enable you to make sense of that complex social phenomena. So there is a pure proletariat, there is a semi-proletariat, there is a lower middle class which has elements of working class because salaried lower echelons of petty bourgeoisie. They are also part of proletariat in some sense, but they are also getting salaries which is and a lifestyle which has petty bourgeoisified them. So politically speaking, they are part of petty bourgeois. Political economy sense, we are talking about mental workers. So that exact data about it, I will send some reading material in this group or whatever Comrade Suresh suggests me to. I will send some reading material. There is quantitative determination of different classes. The second question, yeah. See, global fascism, I mean, there is no organized global fascism. And there cannot be any organized global fascism as far as I can understand. So, as far as Revolutionary Communist Party in different countries is concerned, there is a need for a body like Communist International. But now is not the stage right now. The crisis that every communist movement in different countries is faced with requires it to undertake the task of analysis of its own national situation with Marxist science and Marxist philosophy in command. So, right now, any world party like Comintern cannot be made. But we are in support of building a forum like Common Forum, where different communist organizations of world can engage with debates and discussion with each other, help each other to understand the global situation as well as the international situation as well as their own respective national situation. So in that sense, I think there is need for such a forum. But of course, when global fascism in that sense can form alliances, at Italian fascism and German Nazism did, but that association or alliance is a different thing. Comintern or any body like that is a different thing that is modeled after a world party. But I don't get the preciseness of the question. I'm just answering, at the spur of the moment, whatever I can understand from that.
Yeah, that's fine, Abhinav.
Yeah.
Then, RK's another question. What is the relevance of so-called techno-feudalism brought forward by Yanis Varoufakis in the context of the latest global technical revolution and era of generative artificial intelligence?
It's crap in world. There is no such thing as techno-feudalism. Varoufakis talks about techno-feudalism in the sense that the distribution of surplus value in present capitalism, in the distribution of surplus value, rents and interest also is a kind of rent, you can say. It is rent on a sum of money, basically. So rents are assuming the larger part of the distribution of surplus value. Now, this is such a ridiculous theory. Anyone acquainted with the basics of Marxist political economy know that with the development of productive forces, this will happen. In fact, Marx predicted this in Capital Volume 3 itself, that as productive forces will develop, speculative investments, renting, and investment of interest bearing capital will increase, and the distribution of surplus value will happen less in the form of entrepreneurial profit, what Marx called profit of the enterprise, and more in the form of rent and interest. There is nothing feudal about it, because feudal rent is a very different thing. Capitalist rent and interest is a very different thing. And Varoufakis is a highly confused person. People are talking about general intellect. Marx talked about general intellect, that is scientific knowledge, and the scientific knowledge that enhances the development of productive forces, and linking it with different variety of things. I would suggest not to read too much of this fashionable left writings, because a lot of people who are online, young people, very promising, very intelligent people, before coming into contact with the science of Marxism, the classical science of Marxism, the philosophy of Marxism, they come into contact with people like Varoufakis and Zizek and Badiou. It's better to stay away from them before you have already developed a strong foundation in Marxist philosophy and political economy. But this theory of technical feudalism, it's crap, it's bullshit, it's rubbish.
Okay, fifth question of RK, as he himself acknowledged, is not relevant to this discussion, so we are not taking. We are also, in fact, we overrun the time. And I'll take the gist of his last question and present to you. You can respond on it and also place your concluding remarks. So he is asking to what extent is the knowledge gap or gap in understanding a handicap in unifying the proletarian masses, creating the revolutionary party, building a class struggle, and how do we address these gaps? So you can respond to this and also place your concluding remarks.
Yeah, just a very small comment about it. When I was making this presentation, I knew that I would be enlightening some people, I would be repetitive for some people, and I would be confusing for some people. All of the three are very useful. Confusion is the first stage of knowledge. If I am able to complicate the whole issue more and confuse more people, I would consider myself more successful. If I raise such questions, if I raise such curiosities which might encourage my good young comrades who are present here to go back to basics of Marxism and to understand these questions in great detail, that would be the most productive part of the discussion. Enlightening people is the secondary part, and being repetitive and tautological for many people, because what I spoke today, many of the more mature comrades already know all of this, what I was saying. So that is the less important part of my discussion. The people who did not fully comprehend the presentation, that I think is the most productive part of my presentation, and I would be gladdest about that and happiest about that, rather than enlightening people and being tautological and repetitive for people. I think this kind of gap is a very productive gap. There are two types of gaps. One, when you talk about things in a very obscurantist language, in a language which is designed to make people confused in a non-productive fashion. It is designed to make people more ignorant, the kind of language that neo-Marxists and post-Marxists use. That is a different thing. That is a non-productive, that is creating a non-productive ignorance and confusion. But a presentation where we are resorting to the categories of classical Marxism, we are not trying to create new categories just for the sake of it, just for the heck of it. We are using the classical categories, and many people don't even understand those classical categories as of now. I would say that in that case, the confusion that is created is a very good confusion. And my concluding remarks, I would start from here, that this 2-day presentation was only to provoke you, and only to incite you, and only to invite you to understand things in greater depth and more intensively and more extensively. It was only to provoke you and incite you to study more, understand more, number one, and involve in practice as much as we can. Otherwise, there is no point of having this discussion. We are talking about fascism in the 21st century and the possible proletarian strategies to fight against it. And if we are only using this knowledge or these presentations or these information for showing our intellectual prowess online at some forum or in our discussion with different young people in the university campus, then there is no point of having this discussion. The only point of having this discussion is to incite people to involve in theory at a greater and deeper level, at a higher and deeper level, and invite people to involve in practice at a higher and deeper level. If I succeeded in that in any way, even to a small measure, I would consider myself lucky and I would be very happy about it. I would like to thank all the people who have listened to this discussion so patiently for 2 days. Uh, uh, I would extend my revolutionary greetings to them, and I hope to come back to Vedika's forum in the future. Thank you, comrade.
Thank you, Comrade Abhinav. Yeah, I too share your optimism. Let us hope this talk on Vedika stimulates a greater, a deeper discussion on fascism and the proletarian tasks in fight against the fascism. Uh, and there are some comrades thanking you, Blackbeard, Rainbow, Thirupalu. Thirupalu is requesting to post the relevant texts. RK is also thanking you. And you were also speaking about it. Please share the further reading material. We have two WhatsApp groups. We will share this material on these WhatsApp groups. So, friends, those who are not members of WhatsApp groups, please use the link to join the WhatsApp groups. We will share the resource material there. So, on behalf of all the members, I thank you once again, Comrade Abhinav. It's a very productive session today and yesterday. And you advised a discussion on few more topics. We will consider that. And we really hope we can have some more sessions with you again. And I thank all the members who have attended this discussion yesterday and today. And also thank the members who have sent their questions. Yeah, Comrade Abhinav, sorry, you were responding.
No, I just said thank you, and I hope
Okay,
so.
yeah,
I hope to come again.
yeah, thank you. We share the hope.
I will
Okay,
send
thank
a
you all.
list of articles and writings to you, comrade, and you can share
Yes.
those writings here.
Sure, comrade. Yeah, so we will share. It is our practice to share the resource material on both the WhatsApp groups. So we will do it again this time also. So I request all the members to make use of this material, and I hope this discussion will stimulate a deeper thinking and a deeper action on fascism. It takes forward the fight of proletarians against fascism. Thank you all, comrades. Bye bye. And the next session uh, is on Gramsci's life and contribution on June 22nd and 23rd by Ashok Kumba. So we'll have this session on the fourth weekend of this month. So we will meet again on June 22nd. Thank you, comrades. Bye bye. You can exit from this voice channel by clicking on the receiver button. For some devices it appears in red color and some devices it appears in white color, but there is a receiver button. You can click on that to exit from the voice channel. It is advisable to exit the voice channel.